Welcome to Crossroads. I'm your host, Joshua Phillip. Today we have Donald Kendall with the Heartland Institute, and he does their In the Tank podcast.
That's right.
He's here to talk with us about socialism. And as you know if you've watched this show before, one of the issues we have is that socialism is usually only discussed as an economic theory. But socialism is much more than just an economic theory. And if we're going to try to debate it, talk about why maybe it's not a good idea for this country, we can point to, of course, failed states like Venezuela and just about everyone that's implemented socialism in any serious degree. But we should also look at the spiritual, social, and say ideological impact that it also has on society. So Donald, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And we were just discussing about reading communist propaganda and magazines and all this stuff, because wouldn't you know it, writing about these issues, we have to read this stuff.
Yeah.
So, I understand you were just reading the Jacobin magazine.
Yeah, so we at the Heartland Institute, among doing the podcast and different graphic design stuff that I do, we also have the Stopping Socialism program. So one of the things to basically read up on all of this stuff, I kind of have to read the material that they're putting out. So you mentioned the Jacobin magazine, which is just, they're not hiding it, they're a socialist magazine, or the Communist Manifesto. And it's the idea, I was telling you, the idea is like, we aren't trying to interpret these things into these sinister ideas or anything. We're not reading the tea leaves or trying to interpret dog whistles or anything like that. Like, this is the stuff they put in their material. They're pretty upfront about it. The one example that I like to use is in the Communist Manifesto, he sets it up, he says, he's like, critics might say that we're trying to destroy the family unit. And that's true. It's like, you think that he's going to go in the other direction and try to deny it, but no, they are flat out about this stuff.
Yeah, what was it? Communism destroys all religion and all morality,
Again,
right?
They're very upfront about that, yeah. The idea, so you were talking about it in kind of like a moral sense. So the book that we kind of launched the project with is Socialism is Evil.
That's this one right here by Justin T. Haskins, Socialism is Evil.
Yeah.
And you were saying it's an interesting take because you kind of toss aside the economic debate for a minute. Say, okay, let's imagine it actually worked for once economically.
Yeah.
Now what happens?
Yeah, well, that's a hard assumption to swallow for most, because you could look across just historical. Every time that it's implemented, it ends in disaster. I mean, obviously the caricatures you have in Venezuela and stuff like that, but even where types like Bernie Sanders talk about it, how it's operating well in Sweden. If you really look into the history, they were doing well when they embraced free market principles. When they started experimenting with socialism, they started tanking down the economic ladder there. It wasn't until they kind of discarded some of that they really brought themselves out. But so what Justin tries to do in this book, he really kind of takes that out of the argument. All right, let's just take all the economics, the failed system that it is, out of the equation. Even if, as you said, even if it was somehow operating fine, the core point is that socialism is a top-down governance of a society where there basically is no minority rights. Right? So, I mean, sometimes a society might be able to do it better if they have a kind of a monoculture where everyone kind of follows the same type of line of thinking. But if you're trying to really have this system govern in a 300 million people population, that's a population that has varying degrees of value systems, religions, just things that are more important to them. And socialism is a top-down thing. So basically, and again, a public ownership of the means of production or something like that, right? So that would essentially mean that you as a citizen in this country would basically have some type of ownership indirectly in every industry, whether it's meat slaughtering or anything like that, or alcohol production or something like that. If those things are completely counter to your religious values, so what? That's just the system that you're in. So at its core, socialism is evil.
Well, in some of the forgotten history too, is you talk about, sexual liberation and all this stuff. Like it all you want. Let's have a look at what it looked like under the Soviets and early Chinese Communist Party. They had free love movements, but it was forced free love.
Sure.
If you were a young girl all right, and you're working at a factory and your boss wanted to rape you, you had to do it. Because you had to be a good communist, you had to share your body with him. Because the shared wives concept that Marx talked about.
It's so you talk about like the USSR, Soviet Union, and like these were the things that were kind of in the public's perspective for basically the recent history. But because after their fall and as time heals all wounds type of a thing, this idea of just like kind of looking at them as like the bad example just kind of fades away, especially among the youth who were born after the fall of the Soviet Union. So it's so the angle that we're trying to take at the Heartland Institute with the Stopping Socialism project is to really aim it towards the youth. And one of the things that we try to again, kind of looking at it from the perspective of the socialists that are advocating for this type of stuff, and they always try to label it as a means to achieving equality or fairness or something like that. But in reality, when you boil down into it, it's all about social control and basically central planning and ushering different societal change.
Yeah, well, the question is how does a government make everyone equal? What does it mean to make everyone equal? And how do you deal with the issue that some people put in more effort than others, right?
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I mean, he goes into the example in there, that, and I guess that kind of gets to the core of the whole economic problem with it. But it's a system where in practice it turns into a nightmare. And so all the rhetoric that you could have, all the flowery language that you could present it in and try to pitch it to somebody, that works for the most part. Like the idea that this is for equality, that is appealing to generally the youth. And but yeah, when you see it in practice, it does not end up in that way.
Yeah, 100 million dead and counting.
I think the number that Justin says is 167 million either exiled, murdered, or basically dead from the historical pursuits of, achieving equality. So
yeah, there you go. Well, great, Donald. Pleasure having you on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, have to get you on again sometime. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Everyone, please remember to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.